Is there a secret to making one? There have been plenty pretty terrible adaptations in media. I think there's no exact science to making one though. If you ask most people, they'll outwardly say they want it to be as faithful as possible to the original. Some see things like the manga as a storyboard to the anime, even though it just isn't the case. Sacrifices are necessary when going from paper to frame, and it can go even further with TV shows and movies. But people don't generally care if something is faithful for it to be considered a good adaptation. Let's take a short look at some things people love and hate. We'll be discussing The Boys, Return to Silent Hill, The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, and Higurashi. Take The Boys, for example. Now people think it's terrible, but the reason behind the original love for the adaptation was that people were under the impression that the original was solely a comic about Garth Ennis hating superheroes, loving slurs, and wanting to see Batman ripped into pieces and having sex with inanimate objects. People didn't care for the comic in the first place, so they never respected the material going from paper to screen at all. I think that's where a lot of people's loyalty lies. They don't really care about the material as long as it's done well. Now, you can't really say that about The Boys, but I digress. But as an adaptation, something doesn't necessarily need to be done perfectly to be a good one, it just needs to prove to be good outside of the form it existed within originally. People are fine with minor changes, and people are fine with major changes, as long as it's made in a way that cares about the material. There are plenty of examples of shows that are modern that don't care about the material and use it as a stepping stone to tell the author of the adaptation's story. The Boys did especially this, by taking the story from being about how corporations after the War on Terror were capitalizing on marketability and surveillance, and how masculinity can hide deep-seated notions of rage and revenge behind a righteous cause, to being a satire about memes, and social media, and the big orange.
Tell me, I'll fucking suck your dick, please!
I still don't know how people could take the show seriously when they took the character of Stormfront, meant to be a real Nazi, and turned her into a woman who uses memes to take over the country. They expect $70,000 a year for writing this, by the way. $70,000 a year. Hope Vought Rising was worth tanking your show, Kripke. What would you guys think is a good adaptation, though? It's a reasonable question considering how bad The Boys had to beat for it to go from beloved to hated in a year's time. And it does show a problem with adapting material. If you want a faithful adaptation, you have to prove to people it's worth it to do one-to-one. Or else you get things like this, where they put anyone they want on the project, and they end up telling their own story rather than one within the universe and respecting the work put in to create the original material. Other than that, game adaptations are another one that people get really up in arms about. We don't know if the upcoming Zach Kreger's Resident Evil adaptation will be any good, but from interviews it seems like he's played the games and wants to make something that corresponds to the Resident Evil universe. Similarly, take Return to Silent Hill for an example. Return to Silent Hill came out mid-January 2026, and attempts to adapt Silent Hill 2, but instead of understanding what it was even about, they turned James from some kind of pitiable man who can't accept his wife's death into a cult storyline to make it fit better for a film. Would the original story for Silent Hill 2 fit for Yes! There's no universe where you can't do a similar thing to adapt many things within Silent Hill 2, like the various characters some kind of sin, or keep the existence of Mary as a twist near the end. They incorporate the cult from Silent Hill 1 and 3 into the film very clumsily, and they turn Mary into a woman who is drugged by the cult instead of James having to deal with her illness and come to terms with it. It's just very strange to create a film that doesn't respect the intentions of anything that happened within the original story. People, including me, don't like this adaptation at all. I believe it serves as a great example of just not respecting a medium or a story that goes along with it. They just put a lot of ideas together and hoped that it worked in the end. Games are an interactive medium as well, which is why adaptations of things with consideration to a video game are not usually thinking of how you can transfer the experience. It seems insane, but most adaptations try to make a game fit a film rather than a film fit how a game may feel. It gets strange with things like Silent Hill, which are so very obvious to create a film about. Let's talk about something that makes more sense for my channel, Haruhi Suzumiya. Everyone goes after the infamous arc at the beginning of Season 2, Endless 8. But why do people think it's a bad adaptation of the source material? It's because they're cowards. Okay, but seriously, it's because it turns what only spanned 50 pages in the light novel into 8 episodes. 8 episodes that repeat the same loop and events over and over. Why would they do this? Are they stupid? Well, no, actually. While people say it's a bad adaptation, I consider it to actually understand the medium it's going into. There are plenty of ways you can deliver a scene. It's the same as a live performance. For example, a band could play poorly one time, play great another time, and then create a new rendition of a song you really want to hear again. It respects the original idea and takes it further, past the point of being reasonable. The scenes that adapt from episode to episode are functionally the same, but they never use the same animation twice. They have different line delivery, they have an entirely different scene with Yuki Nagato, and end the arc out differently. While I would probably never rewatch this section on my own, I think it's a faithful rendition from text to animation. It does honestly take me further away from getting the idea of what makes people like an adaptation in the first place. Well, not really, considering the way it was done was essentially so insane that it's reasonable for people to dislike it.
I said 2 episodes is the most you can do.
But at the same time, it feels strange to degrade it for succeeding at creating a real time loop. I feel like in the end, this is more of a middle ground example where you can see why people don't like it, even though arguably the concept is more faithful than the original source material. As for a really good example from adapting a medium that's pretty much near impossible to realistically adapt in completion, let's look at Higurashi. The problems when it comes to things that are as long as Higurashi is prioritizing what matters. The time that Higurashi came out in, 24 to 26 episode series or longer were relatively common. Plenty of adaptations during that time actually had the ability to go for a long time, and Higurashi was one of the ones that got a green light to actually have something like that for 2 whole seasons, and adapted every bit of the visual novel that fully mattered. The things that couldn't be adapted were things like individual character thoughts and opinions that go on for paragraphs or equivalent length in pages. It comes to mind that the way that many visual novels are written becomes very difficult to create an anime for them, because a lot of them have route splits and different directions they want the player to go in. Higurashi doesn't actually have anything like that. It's linear, so it may seem easier to adapt into their properties, but the length and character interactions are so ingrained into the identity of the story that you necessarily have to do a lot of legwork to make the story believable. Where the intention of the anime lies is with adapting a work that's about 120 hours in length and making that palatable for an audience. They adapt a large amount of the slice of life scenes and get the main conflict involved within these guidelines. There are some examples that people do point to as poor adaptations, but the most common one is the abundance of gore. The point is moot, considering how long you have in between the sections of gore in the visual novel with how long the whole thing is. The anime has to trim these things down to allow them to be done in a timely manner. Secondarily, that was exacerbated by anime fans at the time calling it the most gory thing ever. But more often than not, when you compare it to Higurashi's sister game and its adaptation, it comes off looking like the stars aligned for it. The Umineko anime never got a second season and was never able to adapt the second set of arcs within the visual novel. Higurashi had the chance taken with the story, and they were able to make it all work. Quite a few things work about the Higurashi anime with the medium of adaptation, regardless of how Dean had to cobble it together with band-aids and gum. Since the art style of the visual novel couldn't really be adapted to animation, they had to pretty much recreate the whole thing as well. What makes it a good adaptation is generally the care given to fit it within the guidelines of an anime. The parts of the visual novel that people really enjoyed were given the time necessary. People who wanted everything were disappointed, but you need to make sacrifices in order to make something that can stand within the medium you're adapting it to. Good adaptations need to consider the medium they're transferring the content to. They don't need to dumb it down, but they may need to trace back the steps and understand what the idea is conveying and cut it down to size. Bad adaptations don't consider this at all. Some things can be changed from source, but if you do this, it isn't the same story any longer. It's just something with the same name. And so, after all of this, what have we learned about what people want when adapting from a source? Probably fuck all. Adaptation is hard. Modern audience are cattle. Anime audience are cattle. The game industry is cattle. It takes more resources to get people who care about the property you're adapting than most modern things get. Fire's gonna keep raging and nobody's gonna put it out as they put J.J. Abrams on the Portal movie again. So any lessons learned? No? See you next time.